February 26, 1991. It's been 2 days since the U.S.-led international coalition invades southern Iraq in an attempt to outflank Iraqi forces and drive them out of nearby Kuwait. In response, the Iraqis establish a defensive screen, deploying 5 divisions of Saddam Hussein's elite Republican Guard, including the fully mechanized Tawakalna Division. Just west of the map referenced 73 Easting, the U.S. 2nd Armored Cavalry, the spearhead of the coalition advance, makes contact with the Republican Guard.
And it was at this point we first received fire from the enemy. I then pull up our 9 tanks online, all of us oriented on this village. I give this troop fire command. Village, direct front, frontal, 1 round heat at my command, ready report, which means everybody load a heat round, look at that village, pick out your aim points on the enemy positions, and when they're ready, we're gonna fire 9 simultaneous main gun rounds at the center. I fire 1 round before that to mark center with a tank heat round. Green says ready, white says ready. I say fire, 9 tank main gun rounds impact simultaneously. Now, we get the word, continue your move to the east. And it's at that point, I just get this gut feeling, I get this feeling that we're about to make contact with a defending enemy force. And I make the decision to go into a tanks lead formation.
That means positioning the Abrams tanks in a rolling wedge with the more vulnerable Bradley fighting vehicles tucked in behind for protection. This formation places McMaster's big guns forward, ready for whatever lies ahead.
So my tank comes up over that crest. And again, remember, it's a sandstorm, right? You can't see very far, but it is if the sandstorm just lifted. I mean, as soon as we came over that ridge, there was some weird environmental factor, but it was like a curtain lifted. And what I was confronted with was the enemy defensive position.
They were deployed in a reverse slope position, which is designed to minimize the amount of time and the amount of distance that an attacking force actually has before it can start to fire on the defenders. Unfortunately, they didn't count on the sophisticated optics and fire control systems of the US M1 tanks, which made their thinking entirely obsolete.
I could see 8 enemy tanks in defensive positions, and I said, fire Sabo, which means we had a heat round in, and it means the next round going in that gun is going to be a Sabo tank, armor defeating round.
The Abrams tank carries 2 types of high-velocity ammunition. The Sabo, an armor-piercing dart made with high-density depleted uranium, and the high-explosive anti-tank round, a shaped charge projectile which can bore through heavy armor.
We engaged that first tank with a heat round. That fireball blows the tank commander out of that tank. And then ultimately there's a secondary explosion that blows the turret off that tank. My gunner traverses left, hits another tank. We're able to destroy 3 tanks as our tank hits the first leading edge of the minefield.
I looked to the right and I saw what looked like explosions to the left front of McMaster's tank. And I couldn't tell if these were mines or artillery fire again. And my gunner, Dewey Jones, pipes up and says, "Holy shit, look at this." And I dropped down inside. I looked through my commander's sight, and I said, "Oh yeah," I was finally impressed with the enemy. Here were, rows, literally 10, 15 tanks spread right across to the front, and you could see that these tank guns were moving. And I imagine, since these were manual T-72s, the poor Republican Guard was in there busily cranking to get the guns around towards us. Then all of a sudden, my tank went into a minefield. And this thing rocked this 70-ton tank. A fireball went over it, knocked me down to the turret floor. And fortunately, my driver, who was very tough-minded, said, "What the hell was that?" And I said, "Don't worry about it, keep driving." As we were coming out of the minefield, we had a couple of tanks to our front. It was, "Sir, I got tanks to my front." And I'm looking at the tank that we're about to take under fire, and the gunner hesitated. "Sir, can I shoot? Can I fire?" I said, "For God's sake, shoot!" We swung to the next one and fired. And in the meantime, I could see that Eagle Troop was taking enormous numbers of vehicles under fire.
Initially, there was a great deal of disorientation on the Iraqi side because they just assumed that this couldn't be American tanks attacking them. It had to be aircraft. But even after they figured it out, they still had difficulty getting into their vehicle in time because they didn't realize how quickly the Americans were closing on them. American armored forces would charge, using speed to simply try to disorient the Iraqis, and it worked. The Iraqis could not imagine armored forces this big, this powerful, moving at them as fast as they were.
It's a tactic developed by General Erwin Rommel, the great World War II German tank commander. And the M1A1 Abrams is ideally suited for this kind of warfare.
The gun stays right on target. It has a geostabilized system, and I mean, you can be moving out at 40, 50 kilometers an hour, going over bumps and firing. And then the shock effect of a 70-ton machine hurtling at you. I think this is the blow from which the enemy could never really recover. We were now on top of their command post, and we entered their reserve position. And just in like typical Soviet doctrine, they had put their tank reserve like a coil, but we moved too fast. They couldn't get out of their coil in time. They were just starting their engines. I looked at an enemy tank commander, looked over his shoulder at me. I could see the expression on his face, and we engaged that tank at very close range. And you couldn't tell the difference between the enemy tank being hit and our gun going off, and just big hunks of metal, blue sparks arced right back over our heads. And then the rest of our tanks came up, and we destroyed these tanks in their assembly area. Iraqis, had set up a pretty sound defense. I mean, it was a reverse slope defense. It had a reserve. It had a counterattack plan. It had a minefield to disrupt our movement. But the fatal flaw was that we gained surprise over them.
Despite the Iraqis' best efforts, Eagle Troop overwhelms the position, killing hundreds of Iraqis and destroying more than 50 tanks and armored vehicles. It's the opening round in a furious tank battle that will soon be fought across a much larger front. 8 kilometers to the north, the 2nd Armored Cavalry's Ghost Troop slowly makes its way through the blinding sandstorm. In the reduced visibility, they have lost touch with Eagle Troop. Ghost Troop's commander sends 2 lightly armored Bradley reconnaissance vehicles to re-establish contact.
I tell the driver to start slowing down because I'm starting to see these little objects. But what could they be? I mean, you're in the middle of the desert. So I'm immediately thinking, well, they're vehicles. But my number one concern, of course, is I'm going to go link up with Eagle. Maybe that's Eagle. Maybe that's not. And I see all these people emerging out of nowhere, out of the ground. And then you see like this diesel plume, and then immediately followed by this behemoth giant T-72 tank backing up out of a hole. Ah, that must be enemy. Now I'm seeing a lot of activity. Turrets start moving, and I'm like, oh, where is Eagle Troop?